They say evil is not born, it's made. Some killers grow up in violent homes. Others are shaped by their surroundings. And then there are the ones who seem to carry something darker within them. A monster waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Today, we're talking about Peter Lundin, Denmark's most infamous serial killer. I would like to mention that listener discretion is advised as sensitive topics are discussed. This was a man who murdered not once but twice. A man whose crimes stretched across two countries. A man who, despite being locked up, still manages to manipulate and disturb people from behind bars. This is a story being presented on Strawberry Ink. And today we dive into the case of Peter Lundin. Peter Kenneth Bostrom Lundin was born in Denmark in 1971. His early life was not exactly stable, but not every troubled kid grows up to be a killer. Peter Lundin, however, was different. Peter was born on February 15th, 1972, at the Roskilde Hospital in Denmark, to Ole and Anna Lundin. Anna was originally from Germany. Ole temporarily lived in Canada with his brother, where they seek to join the military. However, in 1950, Ole and his brother left Canada for the United States to enlist in the U.S. Army instead, which allowed them to keep their Danish citizenship. Unlike service in the Canadian military, usually if you join their military and you are not born in Canada, you have the right to become a Canadian, but you need to give up your national citizenship. They loved Denmark and refused to give up that Danish citizenship. Ole's brother was deployed to South Korea, where he died from the Hatan virus. When that happened, Ole was stationed in West Germany. The Hatan virus is a condition which is mainly spread in Asia. It's usually transmitted by mice. This virus can cause fevers, headaches, kidney issues, and sometimes hemorrhage. During Ole's time in West Germany, he met Peter's mom, Anna. They married and eventually started living in Denmark. Ole got a job as a bricklayer. Therefore, he built a home for them to live in. That was Peter's first home. However, Ole suffered a blood clot and was no longer able to work that job. The home went into foreclosure and the family moved to America. That was in the 1980s. They settled in Ormond Beach, Florida. Ole and Anna ran a motel, but it went out of business. Therefore, a few years later, they located to Maggie Valley, North Carolina. Ole continued to work jobs as a builder within the next few years. Him and Anna no longer got along, so he left her and moved to Los Angeles, California with Peter. Weeks later, they would relocate to New York City, and then, shortly after, to Boston, Massachusetts. They eventually returned to Florida and settled in Miami. There, Ole got back together with Anna and let her move in with them. Peter had a great relationship with his father. He worked several part-time jobs as a waiter and afterwards dropped out of school with the permission of his father in order to work with him as a builder. Peter did not like school, as he felt disrespected due to his classmates and teachers criticizing him for doing drugs. He would sniff cocaine and smoke weed. However, the family moved back to Maggie Valley, North Carolina, where Peter decided to give school another shot. There, he would sell weed to classmates. Peter and Ole were regularly drunk at this point and became violent towards Anna. The family was dysfunctional and regularly got the cops called on them by their neighbors. But the cops would never show up. The last argument they are known to have was a silly but disrespectful dispute. Peter's mom, Anna, wanted to cut off his long hair, but Peter did not want to, so he grabbed her by the throat and did so for too long, leading to her death. This incident occurred in that Maggie Valley home. In 1991, something horrific happened. The Lundins' mother, Anna, disappeared. The truth? She was dead, murdered, by her own husband, Peter's dad, Ole Lundin. The family of Freya vanished. But Peter was not just a killer, he obstructed. He helped his father dispose Anna's body, meaning bills stopped being paid and the home was abandoned. The Haywood County Sheriff's Office examined the home and found DNA of Anna. Ole and Peter had driven to Cape Hatteras Beach, where they buried her body beneath the sand. However, with the ocean's tides, those beach remains were eventually unburied and floated within the shore. Some passerbys walking in the beach found the remains and called the cops. The body parts had moved near the Outer Banks Buckstone Lighthouse. The body was wrapped in a blue blanket covered with plastic and wrapped with tape as well as a yellow rope. The body was examined at the Dare County Coroner's Office. It was identified as Anna through multiple medical records and the DNA collected at the family home. Shortly after, her cause of death was established as murder by strangulation. After a further investigation, Ole and Peter had been tied to a criminal probe within the state of North Carolina for murder, as they are known to have been the last people in the family home with Anna. DNA of them was as well found in that home. Ole was 56 years old and Peter was 19. It is believed that Ole and Peter headed to the city of Boxton, then walked throughout the beach to choose where to bury Anna's remains. Both fled the United States afterwards. Therefore, they became wanted by American law enforcement. Assistant Attorney Generals Melissa Trippi and Virginia Gibbons teamed up to prosecute them. They presented the probe to a Dare County grand jury. This grand jury, at the Dare County courthouse, indicted Ole and Peter on a felony of first-degree murder. Once the indictment was unsealed, the case could proceed immediately. The father and son were tracked down and arrested in a Toronto, Canada hotel room. Both were detained at the Toronto police station. They were informed that they were wanted for murder in the United States. They were afterwards booked into the Toronto East Detention Center in the town of Scarborough. Both Ole and Peter appeared shortly after before Justice of Peace Margaret Mary Douglas Bala. They were ordered to remain in custody pending extradition back to the United States. Both had sat beside public defense attorneys Brian Greenspan, who was representing Ole, and Robert Rottenberg, who was representing Peter, as well as prosecutors Janet Henchy and Aaron McKay, who had been working together to send the duo back to America. This case was then transferred to the Superior Court of Justice, where they later faced Justice John Crosby, who reviewed the request of extradition and sent them back to the United States officially. Both the father and son had fought the extradition. They were dropped off by Canadian law enforcement at the RCMP, a section this agency uses at the Toronto Pearson International Airport in the neighboring city of Mississauga. That is where they flew from on a Learjet 35 plane, landing at the Dare County Regional Airport in Manteo, North Carolina. Both were picked up there by the Dare County Sheriff's Office and taken to their headquarters. They were afterwards booked into the Dare County Detention Center. At the Dare County Superior Court, Ole and Peter appeared with public defenders, Mark Spence of Nag's Head representing Peter, and Danny Glover Jr. of the Outer Banks representing Ole. Before Judge Jerry Tillett, both pleaded not guilty. Ole reached a plea deal and pleaded guilty to a lesser felony of accessory. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, time served. Therefore, he was immediately released. His venue would have been changed to the Currituck County Superior Court. That was where the trial was supposed to be held, but instead, he was sentenced in this other court by Judge Tillett. He afterwards moved back to Denmark, where he lived until he passed away in 2014, dying of heart failure. Peter as well reached a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to a lesser felony of voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Both of these guilty pleas were entered in July 1993. Judge Tillett refused to let Peter withdraw the guilty plea and would not resentence him. Therefore, he appealed to the higher court. The North Carolina Court of Appeals in 1994 as well refused to let him withdraw the guilty plea. But a year after that, he was granted the chance to be resentenced. Therefore, the case was sent over to the Pitt County Superior Court. There, in February 1995, Judge Clifton Everett resentenced Peter to 15 years in prison. Peter initially served his North Carolina sentence at the Craggy Valley Correctional Center in the city of Asheville. After the sentence was reduced, he was moved to the Brown Creek Correctional Institution in the town of Polkton. He was released under North Carolina law after completing the mandatory prison time, 1/3. That is nearly 7 years that he did. Peter afterwards returned to Denmark under deportation. He departed in a U.S. Marshal's plane from the Fort Bragg military base and landed at the Copenhagen airport. The same thing had been done with his dad, Ole, when he was released from custody. He as well was deported back to Denmark. While at the Polkton, North Carolina prison, Peter signed paperwork and got married to his wife, Tina. She was a single mother living in Denmark and had a daughter. But here's the twist. Peter served nearly 8 years before being deported back to Denmark in 1999. He was a violent, remorseless man who had just been set free. Peter and Tina were no longer getting along in fall of 1999, as Peter became violent with Tina and her daughter. Therefore, he got kicked out of that home and moved into a group home in the town of Norebro. And less than a year later, he killed again. By 2000, Peter Lundin had established himself in Denmark. He had confidence, charm, and a disturbing ability to manipulate those around him. That's when he met Marianne Peterson, a single mother living in Rodolphe with her 2 sons, Dennis and Brian. He met her at the Copenhagen brothel, where she was a sex worker in order to earn extra income since her husband had died. She was the owner of that brothel, which was a massage clinic before her husband died. Both had started that business together with the husband's investment funds from working as a painter. She turned it into a brothel since she did not have her husband's massaging skills. Both Peter and Marianne eventually became a couple. Marianne fell for him, unaware of the monster she had let into her home. And in June 2000, she and her 2 sons vanished. The truth? Peter Lundin had murdered all three of them. He dismembered their bodies just like he had done with his mother years before. But this time he was smarter. He disposed their remains so thoroughly that their bodies were never fully recovered. Marianne had a stepson who reported the three missing. He looked around for them and found a note on her front door that said she and the two sons who had been missing went on vacation. However, that was obviously a lie since the three never returned home. The stepson entered the home and found that furniture had been moved around. There was trash throughout the home and vomit in its toilets. There was also a strange smell coming out of the basement. The stepson informed the police about this. Therefore, the home was searched by law enforcement. Law enforcement found blood stains around the house. The blood stains were reported on Marianne's bed, in her car, and in the home's basement. There were also blood stains found on a chopping board and blender in the kitchen. The stepson informed them that Marianne had been in a relationship with Peter Lundin, who had recently moved to Denmark. Therefore, the police went to that group home to speak to him, the one where he was staying at. Peter claimed that Marianne and her two sons were on vacation. He also claimed that he went to her home to paint it while they were gone. Peter thought that by saying these things, he would get away with murder. However, after further investigation, it was determined that Peter had killed and dismembered the three. Therefore, the police on July 5th that year returned to the group home to arrest him. He was detained at the Heath-Dovry police station, where he spent the night. Peter ultimately confessed to killing the three. He said that he was upset about Marianne talking to another man on the phone in a sweet way. When the police officers arrested him, Lundin played his usual game: lies, manipulation, and deflection. At first, he claimed Marianne had simply left. Then he admitted to killing her, but denied harming the children. Eventually, though, the evidence spoke louder than his words. He confessed to strangling them to death. That confession matched autopsy reports from the Department of Forensic Medicine in the University of Copenhagen. He was booked into the Vestry prison in western Copenhagen. Peter afterwards appeared before Judge von Johansen at the Copenhagen City Courthouse. The judge ordered that he remain in custody pending trial. He was assigned to have public defense attorney Bjorn Hansen represent him. Prosecutor Eric Merlong vowed to move forward with the case and charge Peter Lundin with 5 crimes: 3 of murder, 1 of obstruction, and 1 of corpse abuse. Before Judge Niels Peterson, Peter pleaded not guilty to the charges. Peter went to trial at Copenhagen's Eastern High Court in March 2001. Later that month, a 12-person jury found Peter guilty on all charges. After this conviction, a panel of 3 judges would conduct the next phase of the trial, the penalty phase, in order to decide on a sentence. Judge Niels Peterson did so. Besides 2 other judges, Edler Brun and Hans Thomsen, a vote was made for Peter Lundin to be sentenced to life imprisonment. Detectives found that someone else had as well entered Marianne's home. They connected the dots and determined that this person had been in contact with Peter. This was his dad, Ole. His home was raided and Marianne's items were found. He had stolen them. The stepson of Marianne confirmed that those items had been hers. Therefore, Ole was arrested and taken to the North Zealand police station, aka Station Sid. He was shortly after released, when processing was complete, and summoned to court. Ole and his public defender, Henrik Stachtorn, appeared at the Copenhagen City Courthouse and pleaded not guilty to a theft charge before Judge Jesse Schuyler. Judge Schuyler, attorney Stagatorn, and prosecutor Eric Merlung negotiated a plea deal for Ole. Therefore, he pleaded guilty to the theft charge in the end, and a sentence was handed down on June 7, 2002. The sentence was a 4-month prison term. He was taken into custody immediately after sentencing to Copenhagen's Western prison, Vesterflugtsgade, where he served his sentence and was released later that year. Peter, on the other hand, to this day, is serving his sentence at the Herstedvester prison. This was after his transfer from the facility where his dad did his time. You'd think that this is where the story ends. But Peter Lundin is a kind of criminal who does not disappear just because he's locked up. Even from bars, he stayed in the public eye, giving interviews, boasting about his crimes, and bragging about his sex life. At one point, he even tried selling his personal belongings online, including strands of his hair, feeding into the twisted fascination some people have with killers. And then, it gets even bigger. He attracted women. Women wrote letters to him. Women believed he was misunderstood, and women wanted to be with him. It tells you everything you need to know about the kind of psychological grip he has over certain people. But Peter Lundin is a killer who is not free. And if North Carolina would have kept him locked up, he would not have had the chance to get back to Denmark to do the crimes that he eventually did. Today, he sits in that Danish prison still doing his prison time. But knowing Peter Lundin, he's not done trying to manipulate the world. He never will be. That's it for today's episode of Strawberry Ink. If you found this case disturbing, you're not alone. Some criminals haunt us because they walk among us, but because their actions are too horrifying to forget. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and always remember, monsters are real. Thank you for listening. May those affected rest in peace and have a good rest of your day.